George Washington's presidential farewell address included a caution against partisan infighting, stating that political parties had a tendency to distract the government from their duties, create unfounded jealousies among groups and regions, raise false alarms among the people, promote riots and insurrection, and provide foreign nation and interests access to the government where they can impose their will upon the country. America then went ahead and promptly ignored our first president's advice until our political landscape has been completely framed by a two-party system. But how did we get here? What principles, ideals, and concessions make up the contemporary American political party? Today, we're going to take a look at the history, the positions, and voter base that make up one half of this equation, the Democrats. American founding fathers Thomas Jefferson and James Madison championed a decentralized opposition to the first two Federalist presidencies of Washington and Adams. If you watched Hamilton, this is actually reasonably portrayed with the rise of the Democratic Republicans, who dominated the executive branch in the early 1800s. As time progressed, however, new states entered the Union, and more lenient voting laws resulted in a splintering of the party in 1824, resulting in four candidates representing separate factions, with John Quincy Adams emerging the president. Adams' support came from the eastern states, who referred to themselves as National Republicans, while their largest inter-party opposition came from the country's southern and western states, who all supported Andrew Jackson and were referred to simply as Democrats. Jackson would eventually win control of the party with his presidential victory in 1828, and the former National Republicans would join with other opponents of Jackson to create the Whig Party, which served as the main opposition to the Democrats. This lasted until the 1850s, when the country expanded westward and needed to decide if or how these new states would implement the practice of slavery. Northern Democrats argued each state or territory should decide for itself, and Southern Democrats argued that slavery should exist in all of the territories in the westward expansion. Their inability to reach a consensus led to their defeat at the hands of the new Republican Party and their candidate Abraham Lincoln, who ran on an anti-slavery platform. Tensions over deciding the nation's position on slavery mounted until civil war erupted, and with the Union's victory, the Republican Party cemented its place as the Democratic rival in America's now two-party system. The Democratic Party from this point was one that garnered support from the South, rural communities, and cultural conservatives until the onset of the 20th century, where a large faction of Democrats began supporting progressive policies, including an expansion of the role of government to advocate for social justice reform. This would eventually lead to party turmoil and repeated loss to the Republican Party at the presidential level, with the exception of Woodrow Wilson, who was all about regulating big banks and industries. This, however, quickly lost its appeal during the Roaring Twenties due to America's broad approval of big business and lavishness, until the stock market crashed, and the Democratic progressive nominee, Franklin D. Roosevelt, won the presidency and introduced the New Deal social programs, including many that have wide support today, like Social Security and the minimum wage. Roosevelt's popularity and leadership during the Second World War would lead to a near half a century of Democratic executive control. Their shift from conservatism to a focus on a more centralized government naturally led to dissatisfaction from Southern Democratic factions, which was further exasperated when Harry Truman platformed his administration on promising civil rights. This disenfranchisement marked the beginning of a change in the electoral base for the Democratic Party, as it had Southern Democrats either gradually walk over to the Republican Party to halt their perceived government overreach, or led to their attempts to temporarily offshoot, such as in the form of the Dixiecrats. While this was happening, Black voters who were previously loyal to the Republican Party began their shift to the Democratic Party. This shift was cemented when Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act in the mid-60s. LBJ allegedly said at the time, I think we just delivered the South to the Republican Party for a long time to come, which largely proved true, as these voters switched towards Republican candidates due to their ideas of race and evangelical Christian identity. With the exception of the one-term presidency of Jimmy Carter, the Democratic Party would go on to lose to the Republicans at the executive level until 1992, when Bill Clinton was elected president. Clinton, unlike his progressive predecessors, supported cutting social programs for the sake of the deficit, and supported international trade agreements, like NAFTA, which were massive victories for corporations. This ushered in the age of the New Democrat, one that is sometimes synonymous with neoliberalism, a philosophy that promotes deregulation and the growth of the markets. Neoliberalism's focus on economic growth can benefit capitalists, or those who manage the property or companies of capitalists, but America's embrace of this philosophy has coincided with the wealth accumulated remaining at the top, as the divide between those with wealth and those without has only grown wider in recent generations. This started a schism, which still largely exists today, in that there are progressive Democrats who want to return to their party's 20th century roots that are pro-union and pro-working class, while establishment Democrats believe that Clinton's more moderate approach is the path to victory in modern America. This push and pull takes us to Obama's progressive campaign and his rather centrist administration, a resurgence of the populist wing under Bernie Sanders' campaign against the establishment favorite Hillary Clinton, and Clinton's unexpected loss to Donald Trump. The Democratic Party's future largely depends on whether the progressive wing of the party, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and other Justice Democrats, are able to move the party more to the left, or if the moderate approach, emblemized by 2020's presidential election winner Joe Biden, will maintain its hold. The Democratic Party of today tries to leverage a strong federal government to work for the people, particularly when it comes to keeping businesses and industries from harming others in the pursuit of profit. They also advocate to maintain the social services and programs that theoretically benefit the poor, less abled, and disenfranchised in society, protecting and expanding civil rights across minority groups, as well as preferring to keep the church and state separate. The social and class issues of the Democratic Party are recently at odds, where the left wing criticizes the party's platform as one that panders to marginalized groups with rhetoric, but doesn't offer enough to protect the country's citizens from increased corporate globalization. In contrast, more moderate party wings ascribe to the incremental victories the Democrats have secured as being on the right path, and often point to the Republican opposition as a cautionary tale for minorities, much to progressive frustration. It is tempting to describe the Democratic Party with a broad brushstroke, as one that garners support from peoples of color, the young, and other marginalized groups like the LGBTQIA communities. That, however, would be playing to broad generalizations that rely on issues that barely go past the surface understanding of why constituents vote the way they do. Instead, it's important to understand what these different coalitions actually want. A 2018 Gallup poll discovered that Democrats across the board considered healthcare, gender equality, the income divide, gun policy, climate change, immigration policy, and the economy as a whole as their top priorities. Most Democratic voters prefer some form of universal health care, raising how much corporations and the wealthy pay on taxes, and increasing government spending on education. The disconnect between what the voting base prioritizes and how much the Democratic Party fulfills these demands will likely determine its success in the years to come. With Donald Trump's brand of nationalism likely to stick around despite his electoral defeat, the Democrats will need to decide what shape will best oppose the Republicans, be it one that adheres to the progressives or one that stays its current centrist direction. Thank you for watching us explain America's Democratic Party. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for part 2 of this mini-series on the two-party system. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, feel free to leave them in the comments below.